Welcome to this Day Live, the Sunday talk show, where we discuss all things political, bringing you the top stories locally, nationally, and from around the world. I'm Ruben Abati, and this is a special edition, Easter Sunday. May the blood of the risen one protect you and your families as you watch this program and take you forward as the entire world combats the war, fights the war against coronavirus. This Day Live begins now. Happy Easter Sunday, once again in the time of coronavirus. And I would like to welcome today's panelists. I have with me, right here in the studio, Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director in Office Enough, and Professor Bola Akinterewa, Director General, Bolitech Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Prof. and Yemi, happy Easter Sunday.
Easter.
Yes, good to have you here. In spite of the isolation policy, but you guys are involved in the media.
Essential
and you are exempted, and you are allowed to go to work. So it's good to have you here. But let's begin here in Nigeria, where the country has confirmed 13 new cases of the coronavirus, which now makes it a total of 318 cases. 70 patients have so far been discharged, with 10 deaths recorded. Lagos has the most cases, with 174 cases. The Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, has 56, and Osun State has 20. Of the new cases, Lagos accounts for 11, Delta and Kano states account for 1 each. Coronavirus cases are rising significantly in Africa, which has now more than 13,000 confirmed cases. Meanwhile, the United States has now overtaken Italy to have the highest death toll from coronavirus in the world. The latest data, compiled by Johns Hopkins University, shows more than 20,000 persons in the United States have now died. A terrible situation in which the world has found itself, Prof. and Yemi. But here in Nigeria, we have a very precarious situation. The president issued a statement yesterday in which he said that, well, here in Nigeria, the lockdown will continue for as long as necessary. I thought that was vague.
Very vague.
The president did not say, oh, it will continue for 2 weeks, it will continue for 3 weeks. He left it open-handed. So, open-ended. Who is going to determine that? Is it the state government?
Is it
the Nigerian Center for Disease Control? That's 1 point. 2, we have also seen in Nigeria an escalation in terms of the numbers. Yes, we have about 70 persons who have recovered, but at the same time, we have the numbers of confirmed cases also increasing. Are we likely in Nigeria to get to a point where there will be an explosion? An explosion that will have implications not just for Nigeria, but for the whole of Africa. 3rd point, it was reported over the weekend, okay, we're still in the weekend, that persons are beginning to take the laws into their hands in Ogun State and in Lagos State, in places like Agbado, Abule Egba, Ifo constituency too. That's how I know it as a politician, Hoodlums, over 200 of them. Some who call themselves Awala Boys, some who call themselves 1 million boys, they took to the streets. And they took the initiative in their hands. They were going from house to house to rob people, to collect money, to rape women. Yeah, some of the residents have also said, well, if this is the situation, we too will help ourselves. And you have a situation in a section of Ogun State and Lagos State, whereby people are taken onto the streets. They have lost faith
they escaped
in
from
the system.
to Lagos State.
They are doing retaliatory attacks. What are the lessons that we should learn? What else should the Nigerian government do that was not contained in the president's message yesterday? I'll start with you, Yemi.
Thank you. A lot. And I think to your point, starting point, the statement was vague. Look, we don't have, if you've given me internet and there's light and my AC is working, it's easy, unemployment rate is not too high, our poverty levels are not so high, the dynamics are very different. So we can't copy and paste what is working in other countries without making arrangements for the peculiarities of our context. So the lockdown, for example, wasn't national. When the president made his statement 2 weeks ago, it was Lagos, Abuja, and Ogun State. Other states have done variations of that, lockdown Ondo, lockdown Rivers, lockdown wherever. But if the presidency will continue for as long as is necessary, what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of planning? What does that mean in terms of information management? What does that mean for a state like Lagos, which started off saying it wants to feed 200,000 people? It hasn't fully distributed that number quite yet, but it's still ongoing. But you suddenly say you want to shut down for another 2 weeks. That means that the state needs to get to planning to figure out what it's going to do. The state needs to engage influencers and stakeholders. Especially, I think I really want to put the point about clergy, both imams and pastors. Your average Nigerian hears their pastor or their imam infinitely more times than they hear their state governor. I mean, in Lagos, we're hearing the governor more because of what's going on, but normally people don't. However, it is those same clergy that have found it very difficult to accept that we have a pandemic. And this is what it means. It means your congregation needs to sit at home. So if people in the clergy, from imams to pastors, are grumbling that why are they made to stay at home? At least people are going to the market. Why can't they come to church? Then we have a challenge on our hands, because people will take their signal from their religious leaders and do as they are, in a sense, inciting them to do. So to your point, one, information is key. Before the president made that announcement yesterday, he should have consulted the relevant states to find out that, look, this is what I think is necessary, or what do you guys think is necessary? How much longer do we need? There's a meme going around social media that shows Zuma talking to Ramaphosa. It says, if you tell South Africans to sit at home for 3 months, you have trouble. So you'll be giving it to them slowly, 7 days, then 7 days. Now, it sounds funny, but that's how you work. You give it to people in days that they can plan. I think it's Ogun, excuse me, for example, Ogun and Ekiti. They relax the days for a bit, for a few days, so people can go out to shop. But you need to constantly keep messaging. And not only the messaging about staying at home, not only working with private sector and non-profit organizations in terms of palliatives, in terms of food, but also letting them know the impact of this disease. Look, coronavirus, yes, it's not a death sentence, but our health infrastructure is compromised. People's immune systems are compromised, so that we don't have a health explosion. If we go through it, fine, but better safe than sorry. Ondo's second case on Friday was a gentleman who came in from Lagos. So as Ondo is doing contact tracing, Lagos also now has to do contact tracing. Well,
let me go to Professor Akinteru, Prof. I mean, you are on the board of the Celestial Church of Christ worldwide. You are the secretary. Now, but we have seen also problems with religious bodies, with religious leaders. Some state governments this weekend said, oh, churches could go and celebrate Easter. But some churches, the Catholic Church said, no, we don't want to celebrate Easter.
Because of the risk to their congregation, yes.
Now, do you think religion has been playing a good role in this trajectory of coronavirus?
Yeah, I thank you for this question. But let me begin answering with the point made by Yemi that Mr. President's speech is vague. Yes, of course, we may agree that it is vague. But my view is that the man is simply telling the truth. He's telling us that, look, the PNB administration is not able to deal with the problem. And because of inability, incapacity to contain it, he doesn't know the time he will be able to contain it. So, and I think the best that can be expected of him is to leave it vague, to say, for as long as it is necessary, that necessary all right, we determine the time to put an end to it. So I wouldn't quarrel with that. And you will see why I think he's telling us the truth is this. 3 elements of truth. Incapacity, for instance, to manage the inflow of passengers, people traveling. Boeing 777 of Shifonyema, who brought I think Airpeace aircraft, which brought the Chinese medics, yes, materials
of Airpeace.
3 of the pilots escaped, quarantine. They escaped from the airport. They now have to go and look for them and bring them back. All right? Now, when you are unable to even monitor, people coming in yourself, it's a problem. They took them to Scholars Lodge in Unilag. They protested there that, look, they do not want the 2-bedroom apartment given to them, that they do not want a situation whereby 2 people will be sharing. Now, they seriously protested. The pilots were asking for 1 user apartment, bedroom. Now, this is a problem of incapacity. Now, on truth, another element, which I will link to your question.
Well, Professor Akinjano, I will take a short break. When we come back, you get a chance to complete your thoughts on this very important subject. We'll take a short break now. Here on this Live, the Sunday Talk Show. Don't go away. We'll be right back. And Professor Akinjano will be back. Welcome back to this Live, the Sunday Talk Show here on the Arise News channel. Still with me in our Lagos studio, I have Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director, Enough is Enough, and Professor Bola Akintenewa, Director General, Bulitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. In a few moments, we'll go to London to link up with Arise News correspondent and analyst Bode Oshosami. But before we do so, Professor Akintenewa, I'd like you to conclude your thoughts about
thank you for giving me the
COVID-19 and developments in Nigeria. And you were already making the point about responses by Nigerians.
Yes, you see,
quickly.
I was trying to say that Yemi cannot be more correct by describing the president's speech as vague. But I'm trying to justify the vagueness that, look, the president is simply being truthful because he cannot predict, he cannot tell precisely.
No, that's not what I meant, sir. Yes, he might not be able to know. I don't think anybody else in the world knows. But you actually manage information in a certain way. Okay, so you said you don't know. So what are you saying? We're on lockdown indefinitely?
I'm trying to tell you that, look, I've given the case of pilots escaping. All right? Pilots who went to China to bring materials for this anti-coronavirus, saga. The other one here, for instance, now, the government is saying the Chinese doctors have come to assist, to exchange ideas, to help establish laboratories, but the China civil, construction
engineering company,
CCECC, now say they are there to come and treat, to look after their staff, and not necessarily the way the government has given. That one is already generating unnecessary controversy between and amongst Nigerians and the Chinese. I give these instances to say, if you cannot even manage the administrative issues there, not to come to mentioning the aspect of fighting the virus, then how will you expect, Mr. President, to give you a concrete idea of, say, in 1 week, in 2 weeks' time? I give this background to enable me answer the question, the role of the churches in this particular case. I think the The Catholic bishop in Port Harcourt did very well. Very well. And I will use that one to justify the case of Celestial Church of Christ as well. Because our own pastor, Emmanuel Mobiyina Oshofa, gave directive that, look, we have God, but we need to give respect as well to the authority. Because the protection of Celestians themselves should be done within the framework of
society.
You are quite correct on that point, Professor Akinterewa. You are saying more or less, give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. But let's now move on and take another important subject. The last few days saw much pressure mounted on OPEC and Saudi Arabia to finalize the biggest oil supply deal in history, as the coronavirus pandemic wreaks havoc on the global energy sector. The argument made by OPEC and its allies to remove 10 million barrels a day or more of global supply has won the support of the G20 group of nations, with U.S. President Donald Trump becoming the unlikely champion of the OPEC deal to support oil prices. The markets are cynical about global coordination to radically cut production as demand continues to be plagued by the plunging global economy due to COVID-19. In Nigeria, the GMD of the NNPC says oil subsidy is gone forever. Arise business analyst Bode Oshosami joins us now to discuss developments in oil markets. Oshosami is in our London studio. Mr. Oshosami, thank you for joining us. Yes, I wish you a happy Easter.
Same to you.
Yes, and thank you for joining us on Easter Sunday. But first, to kickstart this conversation, why the global interest in oil prices? And why can't we just allow market forces sort out prices? As, for example, the Americans have been demanding. Because the U.S. is saying, oh, we will not cut production, we will allow market prices to determine it. Why don't we just allow market forces to sort out these prices?
Well, that's a good question, Ruben. But the short answer is that the U.S. actually is the one pushing for this deal this time, obviously because the impact of allowing market forces is going to hurt many of their own oil companies. But energy is a very vital part of everything we do. All our electricity, most of our electricity, manufactured products, food needs, processing, storage, logistics, heating, refined products, petrochemicals, the whole gamut. And even though the world has been trying to reduce demand for energy, particularly fossil fuels, oil demand, particularly in 2020, was still a massive 99 million barrels per day projected for 2020 before we had this situation of coronavirus. OPEC really is not, they say their target is not to aim at a price. If you go into their website, what they say they are doing is to coordinate and unify the petroleum policies of the member countries and stabilize. And I think the key thing is stabilization. They don't want to see swings and a situation where they're not getting the right level of investment in the oil sector. But they say they're not aiming at prices. What they want to do is stabilize it. And like I said, the U.S. is the unlikely force behind the push to get OPEC to do these cuts this time around.
On Thursday, OPEC agreed to cut by 10 million barrels. And then they also said another additional 5 million barrels will come from OPEC non-members. But if you look at the market, the response of the market is adopting a wait-and-see attitude. And even by Friday, prices fell. What is the explanation for this? It looks like there is no confidence in the market in terms of what has transpired so far on Thursday and on Friday.
Well, I think the situation is overwhelming. This is really not an OPEC normal energy crisis where all this is driven by this pandemic, which has completely decimated the global economy and evaporated demand for petroleum products. And that's why the markets are not seeing OPEC as having the ballast to be able to handle this type of situation. My understanding, according to the press release and the OPEC website, is that the OPEC and allies have agreed to reduce by about 10 million barrels per day. Out of that 10 million, 5 million barrels comes from both Saudi Arabia and Russia. But they are also pushing for global cuts, particularly from G20. And G20 say they will cut another maybe 5 million barrels. OPEC are saying that these cuts will be just for 2 months, will go down to 8 million for another 6 months and down to 6 million for another 16 months. And by April 2022, they'll be reviewing the situation. But the next meeting is the 10th of June. I sense as the environment changes, they will be updating these numbers. Well, I think the key thing is when you add all these cuts, it all comes to about half of the reduction in demand. So the markets, of course, except OPEC is able to double what they say they're going to do. They don't see these cuts as being enough to dent the situation that's on the ground. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of cynicism in terms of the prices. And many are saying, although we are not likely to see prices go down to 20 or much lower than that, still these cuts are not enough to take prices up to the 50s that we used to have before.
Well, Mr. Shosami, previously what we saw was the ego blame game between Russia and Saudi Arabia, with the United States on the sidelines. But after Thursday meeting, we saw Mexico refusing to take on its own share of the burden. Mexico, because, I mean, the three big forces have been saying that there must be burden sharing. But Mexico is saying it will not take 400,000 barrels per day cut. It can only accommodate 100,000 barrels per day cut. Now, how will this affect the OPEC Plus agreement? Because Mexico remains adamant after Friday.
Well, Saudi Arabia is insisting that Mexico should take up its share. The real reason is Mexico has already hedged. That means they've gone into hedging deals, which cost them a bit, which allows them to make money if the prices go even under $50. So they've hedged at $50. Anything below $50, they will be compensated for it. So they don't feel the pressure to reduce their production, to bring their prices, because they just don't see prices going up over $50 per barrel. So because of this hedging that they have already invested in, they are not as motivated as other countries. But Trump, we understand, has said he will help in taking some of the cuts that Mexico should have taken. But that will have to be seen in terms of how practical it's going to be, because the U.S. companies say they do not want mandated cuts. If you look at last week's U.S. production, it dropped only by 600,000 barrels. And we saw inventories going up another 15.2 million barrels. So what we are seeing in the data and what the U.S. is promising in terms of cuts don't quite agree. But let's see what happens when markets open after the holidays.
Well, Mr. Shosami, where do you see Nigeria in all of this? Nigeria has had to reduce its benchmark price and also its production targets for budgets. What are your thoughts on this? Shouldn't Nigeria just pull out of OPEC? There are many Nigerians who think that Nigeria should pull out of OPEC because OPEC is an irrelevant cartel. But let's take a short break. When we return, we'll take your thoughts on that subject. We'll be right back. It's still This Day Live here on Arise News. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on Arise News. I still have with me in the Lagos studio Professor Bola Akintenewa, Director General at the Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, and Yemi Adamolekun, CEO, Enough is Enough. And in London, I have with me Bode Oshosami, Arise News correspondent and business analyst. And we've been having a conversation with him about developments in OPEC and OPEC Plus during the week. Mr. Oshosami, before we went on break, I had asked you the question about Nigeria's role in OPEC or OPEC Plus. And I'd asked, Shouldn't we just pull out of OPEC? What is the implication of all of this for Nigeria?
Well, I think what OPEC really does for countries like Nigeria is provide a lot of the pricing intelligence, which we don't have. And there is scope for technology cooperation and helping countries like Nigeria improve their competitiveness, which I think is going to be far more important than pricing in the future. Mind you, all this declaration of cooperation started just in 2016, and it was supposed to be a short-term measure, but that is what has been on the headlines for the last 4 years. Nigeria is also in a precarious fiscal situation. I'm sure you know what they had to do with the budget. McKinsey, for example, predicted that the GDP contraction in 2020 will range from minus 3.4% in the best case to as low as minus 8.8%. So it's really going to be a tough year if we don't get our act together. And the reduction in production, I think that is somewhat inevitable. 25% reduction is about 22% reduction is what they did in production, down to 1.7 million barrels per day. That is realistic. The price of $30, I'm not sure that is realistic, but within the next 2 months, the government may have to revise that down to $25 per barrel. But I don't think OPEC is going to continue to play the same role of being the sole stabilizer. I think we're going to see more global coordination of these types of things in the future. And our role in OPEC, or OPEC's real, their contribution will move away from this price-related issues.
How do you see the future of OPEC and its alliance, given recent developments?
Certainly, I don't think they will disappear. If anything at all, this situation made them stronger. Just like I said, if OPEC had backed out and we had a free-for-all in the market, then, of course, the U.S. and many of the more expensive offshore plays like Nigeria would also have got into trouble. So this whole idea of stabilizing market makes sense to some extent as long as it's not overdone. But I think the emphasis should be more on sharing technology, building competitiveness, and helping each other to share the intelligence in the oil sector.
Yeah, but does Nigeria have the capacity? I mean, we talk about all these issues. Do we have the capacity? And we're also talking about diversifying forest revenues away from oil. Really, what needs to happen? What are your thoughts?
Well, we have to upgrade our infrastructure. It's a no-brainer that if you don't have electricity, if you're producing 3,000-4,000 megawatts, you're just going to be talking about diversification forever. It's not going to happen. So you need to significantly upgrade infrastructure, electricity, ports, transportation. Those are the key ingredients that will make the economy grow faster. We need to improve ease of doing business. And then we need to expand, particularly the domestic capital market, so that you can mobilize funds, capital funds that can go into new business, venture capital, and also, of course, foreign capital. And my own belief is that privatization is also important to attract more investment and to move more investment into the private sector. That's where you get the productivity. So pushing more capital into SMEs, these are things that are very important. Well, we've been talking about them, but I believe de-risking the environment is still something that has been happening at a very slow rate. And that's why we haven't seen any major improvement here.
Well, Mr. Osun, I like the point you have made about privatization, particularly of the refineries. But these refineries are epileptic. They are still epileptic. And there has been an attempt by the NNPC to get some people to sort it out, but they are not handling it the right way. With price deregulation, do you think the situation will change?
Well, they say they are deregulated oil prices. Let's wait and see, particularly the transparency around the computation of prices. But Ruben, there are three very important things that have to happen if we are going to succeed with the refineries. One is the governance reform and the governance restructuring that delinks the refineries from government. Absolutely important. So whether you call it commercialization, privatization, NLNG model, whatever name you give it, you can't have the refineries in the kind of governance environment that it exists today. The other thing that is important, Ruben, is the full regulation of pricing of oil products. In the case of NLNG, you have to remember that LNG is also successful because it produces directly into an international value chain. All their products are going abroad. LNG does not serve the Nigerian market. The shipping, the piping goes straight to ships that go abroad. And the main customers are in Italy, France. That's where the gas is eventually gasified again. So this kind of business is very, very, very different from a business in Nigeria where you're going to be giving Nigerian customers. That's why you really have to regulate the prices to make it more market determined. The other thing, which is important that we're not talking about, major investments in the inbound and outbound logistics, the pipelines. Investment hasn't gone into it for a long time, storage, all kinds of leakages and issues that exist. So all these are all things that will have to happen, but we need private capital to address them. So the only one where we are seeing some progress apparently is removal of subsidies, but we have to wait to see even how that works, because government can set these bans that are not market determined, and we have this kind of quasi-deregulation. But we assume that we are going to see market pricing, and that's like a good first step that will attract investors. But until we see government out of refining, I just don't see any hope. Mind you, if you go and visit those refineries, most of them are antiquated. They're over 40 years old. They just need to be scrapped in most cases, and new ones are built.
Thank you very much, Bode Oshosami, Arise News business analyst based in London. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on This Day Live, the Sunday talk show today. Well, Professor Akinterewa and Yemi Adamolekun, that was Bode Oshosami joining us from London. And they had raised a number of questions. First about OPEC and OPEC Plus and the prospects of Nigeria with relation to revenue generation in terms of oil receipts, forest receipts, and also the fate of the refineries in Nigeria. What do you think, Prof? Both of you listen to him. Prof, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I share some of the arguments of Bode, but I have some reservations on some. For instance, if we look at the status of the OPEC geopolitically, especially in international relations, how do we explain the rationale, the basis, the reasons for establishing it, first of all? Secondly, have we forgotten all efforts being made by the Western countries, particularly the United States, to ensure that the OPEC does not survive? The U.S. policy on the OPEC, for instance, does not want anything like OPEC that is strong, that will be able to serve as a counterweight to its own policies. Have we forgotten that the U.S., I think, is still currently the country with the largest reservoir of petrol, right? It's a producer. So in this case, I want to believe that as much as there is validity in the argument of Bode Oshosami that in the foreseeable future, OPEC is likely to deal with more other issues than oil pricing. I will concede that argument. But the issue is that within the framework of the OPEC, I think that Nigeria should be able to redefine, to re-strategize, all right, within the OPEC. I wouldn't subscribe to the idea of withdrawing from it, because the OPEC will still remain a major instrument, all right, in serving as a counterweight to in global politics.
As a cartel.
As a cabal. Yes, as a cabal.
So, Prof, it's good to see you supporting a cabal.
No, if you want to use cabal, not in the sense of cabal in the Nigerian meaning of it. Cabal in terms of a group now seeking to protect, the interest of Nigeria as a sovereign nation.
Yeah,
now, in terms of refinery, okay.
I think I'll start, since Prof was going to talk about the refineries, I'll start with that. I think for me, the challenge with the refineries and the subsidy is the same conversation we had earlier with communicating what we're doing over COVID-19, just a failure of governance and a lack of clarity. Well, we talk a lot about white papers existing and the right things to do being known, and the challenge is implementation. The refineries from the Occupy Nigeria protest in 2012, turnaround maintenance has been a recurring decimal point in our budgets every year. And our refineries are still operating at, I don't know, at some point 30%, 60% capacity. And there's always a pushback against privatizing it. Now, if you've run refineries for 20 years that are not producing optimally, or you're paying salaries for people not doing any work, yet you have a challenge with privatizing the entity, that tells you that we're not serious. And
well, recently, Mele Kyari, the GMD of NNPC, pointed out that there are plans to...
But that's what they say all the time. From Diazani to now, that's what they say every year. There are plans, we're going to do it, we're looking into it, we're working on it. Just do the damn thing. So that we're clear around this is what we can... Because that's also part of what feeds the narrative that we're an oil-producing country. Therefore, the government should subsidize petroleum products. But your refineries are not working. So the biggest quantity of what you actually utilize, you import it. Yet the psyche of a Nigerian is that we're taking it from Nigeria. So we need to demystify that and privatize the things so the things actually work and can deliver benefit to Nigerians. Again, it's a problem, governance, leadership, communication.
Well, you mean to borrow Professor Akintane's words. You cannot be more correct. We'll take a short break now here on This Live, this Sunday Talk Show. When we return, the conversation will continue. Welcome back to This Live, this Sunday Talk Show here on the Arise News channel. Still with me here in the studio in Lagos, I have Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director in Office Enough, and Professor Bola Akintanewa, Director General Bolitac Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Now, Prof and Yemi, let's go to China. Scores of African students and businessmen remain on the streets of China's southern city of Guangzhou for a second night following the mass eviction of African nationals from hotels and apartment blocks. Online rumors, well, we don't report rumors on Arise News, but online reports indicate that the coronavirus is spreading among the thousands of Africans in the city, leading to door-to-door testing, evictions, and accusations of forced quarantine. In an open letter penned by the All African Association of Guangzhou community leaders, they called on the authorities to end the inhuman treatment, hatred, and outright discrimination of Africans that is currently going on in Guangzhou. Meanwhile, in a written statement, the Nigerian embassy in Beijing says the government is now prepared to evacuate its citizens from China. Thousands of Africans have been stranded in Wuhan and nearby cities close to the original COVID-19 outbreak since late January. Well, the development on that is that the Chinese authorities have said this is not true, and that China remains a friend of Africa, and that the Chinese authorities believe in equality and, the rights of every human being, whether they are Chinese or not, on Chinese soil. But we have also seen other videos indicating that the Consul General and the Ambassador of Nigeria to China have had cause to protest that Nigerians should not be maltreated. The report is that not only the Nigerians, but also other Africans, they've been evicted by landlords from their homes. They've not been allowed to access supermarkets. They've not been allowed to have access to health care. They have been branded as the vectors of a coronavirus, even when the point has been well established that coronavirus, came from a market in Wuhan, and nobody was indicated. So we're dealing here with a case of racism or xenophobia. And here in Nigeria, the Speaker of the House of Reps has had cause to engage the Chinese ambassador to Nigeria to make it clear to him that this is unacceptable and that Nigerians deserve respect, they deserve their rights to fundamental freedoms under the United Nations conventions. Prof, I'll start with you. Do you think that the embassy in Nigeria in China has handled it well? And do you think that China has a right to stigmatize persons from other parts of the world?
Yeah, two issues in one question. I think our embassy, particularly the Consulate General, has done well because it came in very promptly. Immediately, Nigerians lodged complaints to them. The consular officer also did well by drawing attention to 2 or 3 particular issues. He raised the issue of the attachment of passports being held by Nigerians, saying that actually the carrier, the holder of the passport, is not the owner. It is the federal government of Nigeria that is the true owner. And by implication, seizing any Nigerian passport is just like trying to seize to attach, a whole country, a whole people. He condemned that, and I think he's quite right in that particular case, especially within that particular circumstances. But that does not mean that a sovereign state can still not attach a passport, especially if the holder is wanted for security reasons. If a passport in itself has an irregular visa, you cannot...
these are not the cases.
Yeah, precisely. That's why I say in this particular case that we are dealing with is far from that.
Exactly.
That's why the Chinese policemen have gone beyond diplomatic protocol in seizing their passports. He raised the issue that under normal circumstances, Nigeria is not hostile to the idea of putting the Nigerians in quarantine for 14 days. But if you are going to put them on the second round of isolation, when they had been cleared, they have been certified negative, then you will need to at least draw the attention of the Embassy of Nigeria. So I think our officer did very well from that perspective. And you will see the mere fact that the officer came raises the issue of Nigerians themselves. It took the attention of Abike Dabiri to have told them to say, please report yourself rather than just taking video photographs. Go and report officially to the embassy. Any Nigerian traveling abroad is required to report himself or herself to our diplomatic mission there. To the
That's bad experience that people have had.
Yes.
To your point about incompetence.
Yes,
bad experience that people have had makes them not do it. I mean, one of the videos that was circulating was done by Citizen TV in Kenya. And the issue was the Kenyan actually went to the Kenyan, it's not just Nigeria, went to the Kenyan embassy and it was closed. Nobody was responding to phone calls. The ambassador in China was missing in action. So I think when Africans have that challenge with their embassies, I think it's quite hard.
No, it's not always, you see...
I'm not saying it's always that way. I'm saying that when you have a bad experience of people not standing up for you, then it's understandably why they don't report.
Yemi, in international relations, you have 2 types of diplomatic protection. The first type...
I'm not disputing the type. I'm just saying why people don't use it. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, I want to link that one up to the fact that if you do not, for whatever reason, present yourself to your embassy, so that they will know that you have the nationality of your country, you will not be entitled to any form of protection.
Well,
can I add this? No, I just need to add this really quickly.
You were Director General of the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs. So, and you've been a diplomat your entire life. So I'm sure you understand what you are talking about. But Yemi, you want to talk about the human rights dimension of it and the responsibility of governance, of leadership
to be
if
there
you
for
can
this.
just spend
Yeah, but quickly, I just want to refer to
minutes on that.
I just want to
2 minutes.
refer to the letter that the African ambassadors in China did write, and the point they made very clearly. The group of African ambassadors in Beijing immediately demand the cessation of forceful testing, quarantine, and other inhuman treatment meted out to Africans in Guangdong province in particular and the whole of China. And they also made the point that if there are retaliatory actions in their countries because of the ways Africans are being treated in China, that then the Chinese government will in a sense be will be making itself liable for those actions. Because regardless of if they showed up at the embassy or not, the Chinese government is also crossing its bounds by kicking people out. Okay, you kick them out and put them on the street, even if they're carrying the COVID virus. Is it on the street that you're going to sort them out? Is it on the street that they're going to get treated or tested if you're also denying them healthcare? So I think for me, that's a real valid point. So there's a governance bit from African leaders not being available for their citizens. And yes, some of them didn't go there, but there's also the Chinese government and inhumane treatment.
Prof, I mean, you are the diplomat. In 30 seconds, how do you think that the Nigerian government should handle this?
I think since the foreign minister of Nigeria has summoned the Chinese plenipotentiary in Nigeria, and the ambassador has said that, look, he didn't have the details yet, but that he will look into the matter. And they are expecting a feedback from the ambassador next week, Tuesday, or this week, Tuesday, that is in 2 days' time. I will say that we should wait to have a comprehensive report and then look at it more critically.
So what happens to the citizens during that time?
But whatever it is, nobody should be discriminated against on the basis of color or race, as the entire world tries to deal with the challenge of COVID-19. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on Arise News. I'm Ruben Abate. From our entire team here in Lagos, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next Sunday. Thank you.